I've been visiting the Boundary Waters for over 15 years, which means that I've portaged a lot of times. Portaging my canoe from lake to lake, or lake to river, or even entry point parking lot to the first lake, sometimes that's a distance, has been something that I've grown to love. At first I didn't like it that much, and that's because I didn't know how to do it well. No matter what you're doing, you're bound to be making mistakes as you learn how to do things. Portaging is not an exception. My goal today is to share my mistakes that I've made so that you don't have to make those mistakes yourself, and maybe you can learn to love portaging sooner than I did. The first mistake that I've made, I think, is a common mistake that people make when they first start portaging, and that is to try and carry the canoe with two people, like just keeping the canoe upright right out of the lake and carrying one person at the back and one person at the front of the canoe across to the portage. A lot of times when the portage is shorter, maybe 20 rods, it seems like a good idea to just carry it that way rather than putting it up over your shoulders and carrying it to the other lake. I will tell you though, that is not easier. It's super difficult to carry the canoe like that with one person at the front, one person at the back. It's really awkward, it's hard to carry that way, and that's a lot of weight on your wrist and one side of your body. I've never found this to be the easier way to portage across a portage. Another mistake that I've made portaging my canoe is leaving a seat flap down. So there are seat accessories that you can attach to the seat in your canoe, and it like pops up and pops down, and those are seats that have little backrests on them. I don't always use them, but sometimes I do. And when you do use them, a lot of times they have clips that you can clip them closed. So when you bring the canoe up over your head, you don't have the seat back in front of your face blocking your view. It's super annoying to me. I just like to be able to see where I'm going and see what's coming up. Am I going up or down? Also, it's nice to be able to see when you get close to a lake where the water is. The little things like clipping that seat closed before you start the portage is kind of a big deal when you're already exhausted and have a canoe on your shoulders. It's not easy to set the canoe down mid-portage, then clip it and put it back up. It's way easier to remember to do those things ahead of time. Another mistake that's related to that is I would sometimes clip things onto my canoe so that I didn't have to carry them, and then I would just portage it with my canoe. And I found that that's typically not easier either. So for example, taking a Nalgene, opening the cap, closing the cap so that the Nalgene is hanging from like a rung on a seat in a canoe, and then you don't have to carry it in your hands. Seems like a great idea, but if it's full of water, it's going to throw the balance of your canoe off a little bit. It's also going to move around and be noisy, and just a general annoyance when portaging a canoe. I found that I really don't like that. I think it's better to have extra carabiners and clip it onto a portage pack and have it directly on your back than to have it swinging around over your head and making noise. Another mistake that I've made is trying to keep my feet dry. When you land a canoe at a place where you're going to portage, it's usually best to bring yourself up close to shore and step out of the canoe directly into shallow water if possible. It's easier to keep the canoe stable and not hurt the bottom of the canoe that way. If you try to push yourself up on shore and step onto dry land, it's more likely to tip the canoe because you're reaching for dry land with your foot. You're more likely to tip the canoe because if you beach it and your canoe is sitting on a rock or something, it's a lot more tippy than when it's in water. You are going to potentially scratch the bottom of the canoe over time by bringing it up onto rocks or up onto sandy, even shores. It's usually better just to step into the water while the canoe is still floating, and then hold the canoe for the person in the back of the canoe to get out as well. Usually you already have wet feet before you start the portage, but occasionally maybe you don't. I have had dry feet when I was portaging before, and I tried to keep my feet dry while carrying a canoe over my head, which means sometimes when the water is mucky or wet, you'll have to step from rock to rock that kind of sticks up out of the mud, and then you run the risk of slipping off of that rock into the mud, and that can hurt your ankle, and you can also just fall or drop things. Overall, it's just better to get your feet wet ahead of time so that you're not even trying subconsciously to not let your feet get wet. Another portage mistake I've made is when I've gone into the Boundary Waters with fishing gear is to try and portage my fishing pole by just carrying it. I've never owned a case for my fishing pole. Now I don't always bring a fishing pole into the Boundary Waters. Sometimes I do. Usually if you're going to be portaging with a fishing rod, it is a good idea to have some kind of case or tube to put it in, because when you're portaging, oftentimes you run into little sticks or branches and it's hard to not hit stuff with your fishing pole. Really unfortunate if you're in the Boundary Waters on a fishing trip and you snap your fishing rod on a tree branch on a portage. Another mistake that I see all the time at portages is not waiting for the group ahead of you to clear out of the way. My rule of thumb is if there's somebody in front of me going the same direction as me, I always wait. If there are people coming from the other side of the portage, I'll gauge depending on how big the group looks. Because if you wait for people who are coming from the other lake, there might just be more groups coming after them and you might be waiting there all day. You never know. They're both small groups. Sometimes it's okay to share the portage. If possible, it's always best to just wait for everything to clear out before you attack this portage with yourself and all of your gear. If you approach the portage and try to portage at the same time as other groups, oftentimes gear will get mixed up or confused. I've had this happen where I took off with somebody else's paddle and left mine behind on accident and then had to go back and give them their paddle back. Kind of embarrassing. A mistake I've made previously in the Boundary Waters is not using portage pads on the yoke of my canoe. You can portage the canoe with just the yoke. It's the bar that goes across the width of the canoe and kind of has a little dent for your neck to go into, so when you pick up the canoe you set that yoke right on your shoulders and your neck kind of fits in there. You can portage a canoe like that without the portage pads, but it's not nice. Canoes, even if you get a lightweight canoe, it's a lot of weight on your shoulders. It's so much nicer with portage pads. I would never ever ever want to portage another canoe without portage pads. A mistake that I've made previously is to wear my dry shoes on a portage. On really long portages this can be tempting, but also on really long portages there's probably a low spot with a little bit of water. When you come up to a portage, you probably have your wet shoes on. If you know my tips on the Boundary Waters, I suggest bringing a wet pair of shoes and a dry pair of shoes. Your wet pair of shoes you know are going to get wet, your dry pair of shoes you try your best to keep dry. If you wear your dry shoes on a portage, like you change from your wet shoes to your dry shoes so that you can portage with nice dry feet, sometimes you run into wet spots on the portage that you didn't see coming, and then now your dry shoes are wet. I usually wear my dry shoes only at camp. Another mistake that I used to make all the time at portages, and I still sometimes kind of accidentally do this, is sprawling out at the portage. It's super tempting when you land at a portage and you're hungry or somebody needs to go to the bathroom or you've just been paddling for a long time and need a break. It's super easy to start taking things out of your pack at the portage, like find that granola bar from the food pack, find the toilet paper from the pack, find some new bug spray or your mosquito net, something that you now need that you didn't have out previously, and then you end up with your whole group kind of sprawling out over this portage space. And then other groups will be coming from the other side of the portage, and again, things get mixed up with other people's things, or you lose stuff or forget things. Oftentimes sunglasses get set down and then forgotten, or a map gets set down and forgotten. When you're at a portage, it's important to keep everything kind of together and packed up as much as possible. So often we find things left at portages by accident from other groups. Another thing that I used to not do while portaging that I now do, which could be kind of considered as a mistake before, is not doing a sweep at a portage before leaving. It's important that when you're traveling with a group, you all kind of help each other carry things to the other side of the portage to move quickly. Sometimes you might not be able to carry all of your own things. Maybe somebody else can help you carry. But then that's also when things get left behind. Portages are notorious for just having little bits of gear left behind all the time. The last person to portage across to the other side of this portage should do what's called a sweep, which is before leaving the portage base area, or whatever that spot looks like, is to do a sweep with your eyes, kind of walk around even in the sides of the portage area and look for things that might have been left behind. So I always like to have the last person to do a sweep of the portage landing and a sweep of the whole portage path to the other lake. One more tip to make portaging easier is to bring a bunch of carabiners so you can clip things to the outside of your pack. Some maps have little holes in them so that you can clip them to things, so you can use a carabiner to clip your map to the outside of your pack. You could clip your water bottle your sunglasses if they have a clippable piece to them. Lots of things can be attached to the outside of your pack if you know that you're going to want to use them at portages or use them while canoeing, but then attach them to something while you're portaging. It makes portaging a lot easier so you're not carrying a bunch of little things. If this video has been helpful for you, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I make lots of videos about canoe camping and the Boundary Waters.